Welcome to 'Cause We're Nerds, the podcast that covers trends and new releases in comics, movies, video games, board games, and much more. I'm your host, Andy, and with me is the J to my Silent Bob, the Columbus to my Tallahassee, the Abed to my Troy. It's Chris. Caleb is on assignment in Point Doom and asked us to cover something near and dear to our hearts. So today we're taking another look at Magic the Gathering. This time, it's about one of our favorite events, the pre-release. Why is it a good starting point to get into the game, and what do you need to know before you go to one? Find out on this week's episode of 'Cause We're Nerds. Magic, yeah, we're back. I'm excited.
Yeah.
Hey Chris, how's it going?
It's going all right, Andy. How are you?
I'm great.
It's been a while since you've been on the show.
I know, it's been since, the Twitch episode, right? That was the only one that I've been on.
You kind of did the only mainline one, because the Stan Lee one, the Stan Lee special interview episode.
That's right, yeah.
You were there. So that was almost exactly a year ago, I think.
Yeah, oh, that's true.
Wow.
So, but yeah, we're here to talk about Magic. One of our favorite things is coming up, a new set release. If you don't know anything about Magic, so Magic comes out in, it's a trading card game, first of all. It comes out in sets about 4 or 5 times a year with supplemental products, depending on kind of what's going on in the world at the time, a world of Magic. And so coming up next week or 2 weeks from now is...
2 weeks from time of recording. A week from...
So next week is the pre-release event, which if you've never heard of that, it's kind of a, as it sounds, a pre-release to the release of the new set. So you go to your local game store, you hang out and play Magic and get kind of an introduction to the new set that's coming out. Yeah,
and we really like these sort of events, and we'll get into why, but the sets in Magic are kind of themed around different worlds that they call planes, and this one is actually a return to a fan favorite called Theros, which is a very Greek-inspired world from, it came out 2014, end of 2013, end of 2014?
Yeah, 13, 14.
So it's been a couple years since we've been back, and we're getting to see some returning characters, and we're getting to see a lot of new ones, but the story doesn't matter in the card game, right? It doesn't affect what cards you play or how you play them. So knowing what's going on in the world of Magic is not important to going to a pre-release. What matters when you go to a pre-release is your attitude, right? You want to go there to have fun, to meet a couple of other like-minded people. And I have talked about Magic at length on this podcast before. If you go back and listen to episode 34, I get way too in depth as I tend to do, which I probably will do that again today.
That's fine. I'll try to keep you in check.
I sorely need that. Thank you. But yeah, so it's like Andy was saying. There are a couple of sets that come out a year. There are a couple of other products that are geared towards what are called formats, which are different ways to play the game. There are 2 ways that I like to look at Magic. One of which is the overall look at Magic, which is it's a game of chess that you're playing with poker pieces, but there's 60,000 possible cards or whatever that could be your poker pieces.
We have most of those, by the way.
We have a disturbing amount of them, yeah. And so that's how I like to describe the game to people, and it kind of gets across the strategy because there's a lot of poker or a lot of bluffing in poker, and there's a lot of strategic maneuvering in chess. So it kind of it's kind of best of both worlds for those 2 particular games. The other way that I like to talk about Magic is that it's a rule system with common game pieces that you can play however you want. Basically. So the cards work the same no matter what format you're playing, but the formats have just different restrictions on the cards that you can use, how many of the cards that you can use, how recent the cards are, where you get the cards, which is the big thing in pre-releases. So Magic is such a fun and expansive game, and if you haven't gotten into it, pre-release events are the best time to do it. So, I guess, so Andy, how would you describe pre-releases? What are they to you?
Kind of what you said. It's a time to go hang out and have fun with, for one, friends that I hang out with regularly. It's usually me, you, Clay, Lou, and a couple other people that happen to show up.
Yeah.
In addition to 15 to 20 other people that, we get to see once a quarter, once every 3 months at these pre-release events. And so essentially what happens is you get like a set number of packs, which equals a set number of cards that you get to kind of build your deck or build what you want to play with that night. And the best part about it is that you kind of all start on the same playing level. So there's no like somebody spent a whole bunch of money on other cards, because everybody spends what, $28.32, whatever, exactly, however much it is, depending on tax, your local game store, whatever. Everybody spends the same amount of money, gets the same chance to have a really good deck, or, what can happen is a really bad deck. But, we're going to try and not focus on that, because it's, regardless of that, it's a lot of fun. And so it's a lot of camaraderie, a lot of, even helping each other with their decks. There's been a couple times where I've been playing with somebody who's new to Magic, and they're here at the pre-release. This is maybe their second kind of event that they've gone to for Magic. They either go to a pre-release or like Friday Night Magic, F&M. They were there earlier in the evening, because we go to the midnight pre-release. And so there's F&M. Yep. And then, so that typically is a little bit more for advanced players or somebody who comes to the game with something that they've already built. You can show up and people can teach you. So that's the best part about the pre-release is that you spend a certain amount of money and everybody has the same playing field. It's the same, like everybody starts on the same level. And so there's a lot of, like I said, camaraderie and teaching one another. I've been there and there's somebody there that doesn't know what they're doing necessarily. They're playing the game and maybe they make a mistake, and something that I can say, hey, actually, this is how that's supposed to be played. Let's talk about that, and let's talk about how that affects your deck. So there's a lot of teaching and a lot of growth and learning throughout the pre-release event.
Oh yeah, it's one of my favorite learning experiences, because it's the first time that anybody has gotten a chance to play with these cards.
Oh yeah, that too.
So like people can be familiar with the cards because they're released, in bits and pieces a couple of weeks leading up to the pre-release event. But really the first time of actually like physically getting your hands on these cards is the pre-release. And I just want to loop back around a little bit to the distinction that you made about people bringing their own cards and getting the cards at the pre-release. Yeah. So in Magic, there is a pro tournament scene, a casual tournament scene, where you go and you play with other players and you pre-build a deck, like you build your own deck of cards that you own, and you play off against each other in a tournament format. Well, what happens at pre-releases is you get a pack of six booster packs, and Magic cards are released in booster packs, 15 cards. They all have different rarities. The cards all have different rarities. So within the booster packs, there are 10 commons, 3 uncommons, and a rare or mythic rare, and then like a land or a token in the back of the pack. So that's like the anatomy of a booster pack. And across those 14 or 15 cards, there's the different colors within Magic, white, blue, black, red, or green, which all have like different strengths and weaknesses. They're a really cool design element that I really like about Magic, in that you can combine them in interesting ways to really mitigate the weaknesses that a particular color has, or add things that the color can't do. So that's all like a bit deep. But what really matters is you can go to these pre-release events, get these 6 packs, and if there's a pro player next to you, they have the exact same chance of getting a functional deck or a powerful deck or powerful cards as you do. Yeah. And that's one of the things that I love and I hate about Magic is what's called variance, where not just within opening the packs, but within the game itself, because the game's resources aren't guaranteed, so you're not guaranteed to be able to play the cards in your deck. You can mitigate that by building your deck well, but you're still not guaranteed to be able to do it. And that sort of variance lets newer players triumph over more experienced players, right? Because maybe the experienced player doesn't draw the right cards at the right time. So just because someone has played longer than you doesn't necessarily mean they're going to beat you. It just means that you have something to learn from them, and the fastest way to get better at this game is by playing with people better than you.
Yeah, exactly.
And because if you're actively looking at what's happening, you can figure out what they're doing differently than what you're doing. But again, that's long-term gameplay stuff. What really matters with the pre-release is that you can go and meet people that also like playing Magic, that don't necessarily have the money to maintain a deck, because those things can, they're not necessarily expensive, but you do have to put a little bit of money if you want to stay competitive.
Sure.
So you'll get people like us that only go once a quarter to events. The only event that we go to, more or less, is the pre-release.
Yeah.
And even though we play every week, twice a week, once or twice a week, at least on camera. Oh, by the way, we're from the CNC Power Hour. If you don't recognize us, or voices or anything like that, yeah, or the shirt, yeah. Speaking of which, this is our first 'Cause We're Nerds video episode.
Oh yeah, it's true.
So check out the YouTube for that.
Yeah, if you're listening to us on any of our streaming platforms for the podcast, check us out on YouTube. CNC, or we're going to put it on the 'Cause We're Nerds, aren't we?
Yes.
All right. So
we'll also find us at CNC Power Hour.
Yeah, that's true.
We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
So it's just I feel like I cannot emphasize how much fun I have at pre-releases.
Yeah.
It's full of laughs, even if you don't necessarily get the lingo, because there's a lot of it, and a lot of people like reference old cards and stuff whenever they're talking. But just meeting new people that are in a good mood and excited to play with the new set. The atmosphere is really, really laid back. You may not necessarily be able to like take back plays that you make incorrectly, but people are more forgiving and more understanding, and are really likely to teach you.
Yeah.
So where do you go for these?
So local game stores, typically. That means any place that, generally, if they sell Magic cards, a lot of those places will do a pre-release event. You can actually head, I think, to Wizards' website, magic.com, and you can look for locations for stores near you that host the pre-release events. There are several in our area, and that's one of the things, too, I wanted to bring up while you're talking about like people being friendly. You may not find a store that, like, the first store that you go to may not be the store for you. We've been to at least 2 or 3 before we found the one that we love. Mm-hmm. And we go there every time, and that's where we buy our Magic cards. And we've actually become pretty decent friends with the people that work there and all the people that show up. Like, I will throw this out there. Lou, who's on the CNC Power Hour with us, we met him at a pre-release event.
Yeah.
Loved hanging out with him, invited him on the stream, and now he's a regular. So he's a friend that we made through pre-release events. That's just what I love about these events. So local game stores, comic book shops usually. I would just go go to a comic book shop and ask around. They might know. They can say, yes, we do it, or hey, here's a store up here that I go to, because a lot of these people that sell Magic cards, sell comics, that are into these sort of things, also play Magic and know the best places to go for this stuff.
Yeah, and there are all sorts of resources. Like if you check out the Magic subreddit and you ask for a local game store near you, they're usually pretty helpful. You can also try to find like a local subreddit, or is it Meetup?
Maybe.
There are a couple of like nerdy, or there are a couple of like event sites that people put their pre-releases on. Not every store puts them on in the same place. Facebook will do it.
Oh yeah, totally. Search Facebook for Magic pre-release, and you'll find all sorts of events that are coming up. Mm-hmm. They'll tell you the different store schedule too, because some of them fire at different times. Start the pre-release event at different times.
That's what we mean by fire.
Yeah,
but yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So sometimes, especially now that Wizards has changed the pre-release schedule, people can do them for Friday Night Magic instead of doing them at midnight. So our store, for example, is going to be doing a pre-release at 7:30. Woohoo! Instead of midnight. But they don't just run on the day of; they run all weekend long.
Yep. Yeah, so, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Yeah, and sometimes they do a couple of different things, because there are a couple of different ways to do pre-releases. and one of them is what's called Two-Headed Giant, where you and a partner go and you play together. The rules are a little bit more complicated then.
Yeah.
But if you understand the basic rules of Magic, the rules of Two-Headed Giant are pretty easy to pick up and understand. And so if you have a friend that you trust and want to go and experience the game with, you can find a Two-Headed Giant event, which at least in our area always happens on Sunday afternoons.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
It's like the friendly day.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a good opportunity too if you are experienced in Magic and you want to bring somebody with you to introduce them. This is a great opportunity because you get to play together, you get to look at each other's hands, you get to talk through kind of the move or the cards that you're going to play together as a team. And that's one of the great benefits of Two-Headed Giant. Like,
Oh yeah.
As a whole, it's a format that I really love, and it's something that, talking about the camaraderie, this is just another way to do that. If you don't have a friend to do this with, you can go and find somebody. Trust me, these people are great people. These people that you meet at game stores they're awesome. Like, I've never really had a bad experience.
Yeah, and you find out very quickly if someone's worth not talking to.
Yeah.
Right. Like if they're rude to you off the bat, especially if you introduce yourself as a new player.
Yeah.
Go find somebody else because they're not worth your time.
Yeah, especially go talk to the employees because they're always super nice because they're in customer service. They deal with customer service all day. So
yeah. If you say, "Hey, is there someone that I can talk to that I like that doesn't have a partner for Two-Headed Giant?"
Yeah.
Or there's especially at bigger stores with bigger events, you can say, "Hey, I'm not super familiar with rules and stuff. Is there someone that I can ask a couple of questions to?" They're what are called judges, whose entire job at these events is to explain and monitor game states.
Yeah.
So just so that, let's say something complicated happens, you call a judge over and they explain it to you. If you're confused about something or your opponent says something that you may not agree with, call a judge. And this is something that we didn't talk about the last time on Cuz We're Nerds. And we don't really talk about it on CNC Power Hour whenever we're streaming because it doesn't come up for us. But if you're ever at an event and you have a question, call a judge.
Yeah.
It sounds like that they're an authority figure, but really that they are, but you're not being rude by checking with a judge, and if somebody thinks that you are, you may not want to trust them. And that means you definitely need to call a judge. Because if someone's like, no, don't call a judge.
Yeah.
Call a judge. And I don't want that to throw you off because of that making it seem like there are people that will, con you or whatever. Magic just has a lot of rules.
Yeah.
And we call judges. We'll call Jay, our local game store judge, and mostly just to bug him, but also to answer legitimate disputes or questions and things like that. So don't be afraid to use the resources that you have there. And if you kind of need to know what resources are available to you, judges are the first person to talk to if you have a question about something.
Yeah. And if you don't feel comfortable talking to the judge right away, you want to maybe look it up. You can always search on your phone. There's a website called Skyfall. There's Gatherer. If you look up, it's gatherer.magic.com, I think is what it is. Mm. And it'll tell you basic rules that apply to certain cards. So if you have a question about how effects may be applied in order, it's a good place to kind of your first gate towards maybe before you check with the judge, check Gatherer or check Skyfall to see what kind of the rulings are for how these things are handled.
Well, let's start. But before you do that, before you go to the event.
Oh yeah.
Because at the event, you're not supposed to use your phone.
No.
At pre-release events, it's different. It's way more relaxed. There are different rules enforcement levels in Magic tournaments. At pre-release events, you can probably use your phone. Check with the judge first.
Sure.
But most of the time, they're friendly. They're your friends. Like they wouldn't do this part of the job if they didn't want to. Mm-hmm. Right. So just don't be afraid to give them a call if you need to. Don't be afraid to ask when you're deck building somebody nearby, hey, does this work the way that I think it does? Because a lot of cards have options or restrictions and things like that you may miss the first time that you're looking at it when you're trying to evaluate if a card is good in a situation.
Yeah.
So speaking of evaluation and card situations, we mentioned decks, and the colors and how they kind of help flesh each other out. But there are really a couple of archetypes in Magic that you build decks towards, right? So there are really three main ones. There's aggro or aggressive, which is a lot of creatures getting in fast. Oh, I guess we should back up a little bit. The point of Magic is to get your opponent's life total from 20 to 0.
Sure.
Right? And your life total, your opponent also wants to get your life total from 20 to 0. But just because you only have 20 life points, or you can gain some over the course of the game, depending on the cards that you have, doesn't mean that that's a resource that you need to protect at all times. Because it is a resource. You can spend it to do stuff that is more valuable than keeping it. And that's a moment-to-moment decision-making thing. But still, so back to the archetypes. Aggro is what's called, what we call aggressive decks, where you play little creatures early on and try to do as much damage as quickly as possible to your opponent
Before they can kind of get set up.
Yeah. And then on the other side of that is control, which is where you decide what your opponent can do, what you're going to allow your opponent to do. Basically, this is where you can deprive your opponent of resources, keep your opponent from playing their spells, and that's what control does. And then there's mid-range, which is the third big archetype, where you have you may not have an early game plan or a late game plan, but your mid game plan is really solid. Of, hey, I have a bunch of creatures that are bigger than most creatures, but not the biggest creatures in the game, or a bunch of spells that are not the most powerful or not the cheapest. But I can put all of these together in a way to just outlast my opponent. Mid-range is like really attrition.
Sure.
When it comes down to the actual play style. And yeah, I guess is there anything else that you would like to say like on archetypes and like that sort of strategy for deck building?
Maybe like I would say yes, all three of those things, correct. There are cards, so once you get kind of familiar with the cards, if you've done some research beforehand, you kind of know what to look for when you're opening up your packs, you're cracking your packs. You're opening up the 15 cards and looking at what you have, evaluating kind of the cards that you pull. You can kind of recognize, all right, this is a small creature, but it has some extra effects, which means it might be more aggro, it might be something that you can play quickly. There's a part of the card that shows you your mana cost, and that's something that you want to take into consideration when you are building your deck. Like, if it's a low cost, generally that's going to be more towards the aggro. If it's going to be really high cost, it's going to be more towards the end game. And anything in that, like what's high cost? High cost would be anything like 6 or above, probably.
Yeah. Anything higher than 5.
Anything 3 to 5, 3 to 6 is going to be your mid game. And so you can kind of recognize, as far as creatures are concerned, where those cards might fall and how you sort of build your deck. And there's also like the 5 colors in Magic also sort of lend themselves to these types in some way or another. Like red is typically, you've got your fireball, you've got your little red goblins that cost really cheap. They're going to get in really quickly. So that's like your aggro. Your blue is very control-y because blue has things like counter spells and things that say, I'm not going to let you do that.
Right.
White can be sort of on the mid-range to aggro based on, like, there's a deck term called white weenies, which is effectively like small white creatures, white soldiers, basically building up a soldier army and going and attacking full force with a bunch of different creatures. Green has like the big tree folk, the big giants and bears, and that's your more end game type stuff. And then there's black, which that's kind of a control game as well, because black, you think about the main mana source is what's called a swamp. That's the land that you use. So swamp, you think about graveyards and death, and you're destroying your creatures or your opponent's creatures. You're making the creatures lose life, and therefore you're controlling the board state in that way. So I would say like the 5 different colors lend their own piece to each archetype and noticing what to look for and what to, you know, the attributes and the bonuses, the effects that you might get from each card is going to help you notice those archetypes and build around them.
Yeah, for sure. And we're throwing out a lot of terms, especially like when it comes to the card types in Magic. There's 7 that you need to pay attention to. There's lands, which provide your resources. There's creatures, which are creatures. They're little dudes that stay on the battlefield, and they have power and toughness that determine how much they attack and how much damage they can take, respectively, or how much damage they deal and how much damage they take, respectively. Then there's enchantments, which have a permanent effect on the battlefield. There's sorceries, which have a temporary effect. There's instants, which have a temporary effect, but you can play them on your opponent's turn or on your turn. And
Planeswalker?
Planeswalker. What would 7
Artifact.
be? Artifact. Yeah, okay. Artifacts are like enchantments, but they usually they have a cost associated with their effect.
Yeah.
And then there's Planeswalkers, which are super special and are basically repeatable sorceries, which if you get one, you're probably playing it because they just provide a lot of value for their putting them in your deck.
Yeah.
So whenever you're building a deck, you kind of have to look at all of these things and how they interact. And there's a bunch of moving pieces, but don't let that be too confusing, because there are a couple of guidelines that you can stick to, right? That I like to stick to, that the C&C Power Hour we like to stick to. Lands, you probably need between 14 and 17. So overall deck construction in a limited event is 40 cards. And when we say limited event, those are events where you and your opponents all pull from booster packs, as the card pool is limited. So you need to build a 40-card deck. 14 to 17 of those cards are going to be lands. Full stop, right? Honestly, if you're going below 15 or 16 at pre-release, you have to have a really good reason to. And the reason for that is you need to be able to play your spells on time. And when we say spells, we mean anything that isn't a land. So any of those other 6 card types, right? So when you're building your deck, keep that in mind. Suddenly, instead of having 40 cards, you have to think about, now you only have to think about 22 to 24. Yeah. Right? So it's not that bad when you're trying to figure out all the moving pieces. The next thing is there are 2 big things that you need to pay attention to after the lands that I really like. There's threats and threat reduction.
That's fair.
So you need to the goal, the long-term goal in Magic, right, is to, I guess the immediate goal is to remove your opponent's life total. Yeah. But one of the best ways to do that is to either play more threats than your opponent. What we mean by threats are more powerful cards. Yeah. Or remove your opponent's threats. Right. And so those are the 2 main things that you want to look at. Now, removal is kind of easy to talk about because it's usually spells or instants or sorceries and enchantments, I guess. Some creatures will give you the ability to remove an opponent's creature. When we say remove, it's basically nullify. So either you get it off the battlefield, or you keep it from being able to attack or block. Keep it from affecting the board state. So that's where you kind of want to be paying attention for non-creature spells or effects is removal. That's going to do you the most work in a game of Magic. And then you want to be focusing on your threats, right? Like, what creatures do you have that are bigger and more powerful than your other creatures? The mana cost for the creatures up on the top right of the card, and all of the spells have the mana cost up on the top right. What is the number of lands that you need for that compared to its power and toughness is one thing that I like to look at. So if there's...
The bear test?
The bear test, yeah. Well, it's really the vanilla test.
Yeah, that's fair.
If you're playing a creature that has 1 power, 1 toughness, and you're paying 1 mana for it, that is what's called on rate.
Yeah.
You almost always want to look for something that is better than that. You want to play a 1 power, 2 toughness creature for 1.
Yeah.
Or you want to play a 3 power, 3 toughness creature for 2. And those don't always exist.
Yeah.
Or they do exist and they require you to play different colors of mana to do it.
Sure.
And speaking of which, in limited, you kind of want to stick to 2 colors. I say want to stick. You might end up putting in a 3rd color, but you really want to stick to 2.
Yeah.
Because consistency, basically, right? With your creatures, that's sort of what you want to look for. You kind of may want to value creatures with toughness higher than their power, because that means that they're going to stick around longer, or creatures that do something when they enter the battlefield, so that you get immediate value off of them. Even if your opponent can remove them quickly, you still got something from that.
Yeah.
So those are the 3 main things that I look at when I'm building a deck. Is lands, right? You can kind of it's the last thing that I look at, because I know from doing this so much and just in general deck construction rules that you need 15 to 17, 14 to 18, however many.
Yeah.
For your deck. So you can just sort of set that aside and not pay attention to it until you've built the rest of it. And then it's creatures and removal. And if you don't have creatures or removal, there are spells that get you towards playing your creatures faster, or finding your removal through what's called card selection. Like, you can either draw more cards or look through your deck faster, or what's called ramp, which is where you search your deck for a land, or it's a card or like an artifact or a creature that will produce mana that you can use to cast your spells. All of these things, you kind of want to look at them and see how you can get them to work together. Because if there's anything that I've learned from playing pre-releases for the past over 5 years, it's that consistency within your deck is almost always better than sheer power.
Sure.
If you can get to your game plan more consistently and and faster, and your game plan is better than your opponent's, you're going to win most of the time. Or rather, I guess I can't guarantee that. Your chance to win is higher. And I know I kind of just went on about my deck building philosophy, but is there something that you want to add to that?
No, it's great. The only thing I would think about is, we've got the 40 card deck. Oftentimes you're going to look at the cards that come out of your packs and be like, where do I even start? Because there's suddenly 15 times 6. I can't math real that easily. 90 cards in front of you, right? Okay, so how do you turn that into a 40 card deck? And 40 is kind of 40 is just the baseline, it's the floor. You can put in more. We recommend to stay at that minimum, because again, talking about consistency, talking about efficiency, that's going to be your most efficient and consistent deck. So starting with 90, you start looking at colors that maybe go together. And I talk about colors that go together. Any 2 colors can go together.
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, to do that, there's what I like to call signposts.
Yes.
And when I say signposts, they're usually cards that have multiple colors on them that support a particular strategy within the limited set.
Yeah.
So if a card requires red and green, look at all of your red and all of your green cards and see what works with that.
Yeah.
Right. That's that is the easiest place to start. Is, do I have any multicolor cards?
Yep.
If I do, what does that deck look like if I build it?
Yeah, looking at those multicolored cards, we call them gold cards because that's generally the color that they are, with 2 different colored mana pips in the top right corner, indicating the color of the card or what colors you need to have to support that. And generally those are going to be higher rarity. they're going to be harder to find in your deck. So if you have a couple of them, maybe you have like a blue and a red and a blue and a white, that might be an indication if you have a strong blue pool, like you have a lot of strong cards of these removal or the threat reduction and threat, what was the other word you said?
Threat reduction, threat production.
Threat production, yep, that's perfect. Yeah. Threat reduction, threat production in blue, clearly you should probably go blue. Now maybe you have, again, blue, red, blue, white, you have two different directions that you can go. Sometimes it's easier to look then at the individual color and say I've got, I like to look at the rarity, and when I pull out my cards from the deck or from my packs, I usually sort them by rarity and color, so I can sort of get an idea of where my power lies. Because generally speaking, rare cards are rare and mythic are going to be more powerful, and it effectively goes back to that vanilla test of if it's a creature and it costs less mana but has more power, it's going to be more rare because that's just part of how they distribute these kind of power things in Magic. And so looking at maybe I've got a stronger red pool than a white pool, that might be the direction that I go. Now, we were talking about using two colors. This might be an instance where you could potentially go three colors, where you have some really good white cards that would go with that really well. So you can, what we call splash, which would be to throw in maybe lands that produce white mana. I don't know, is there, side note, is there fixing in the set? Do we know? So
far, all we've seen are the duels at rare.
Okay, well, all right, so that's a problem. So fixing is what we call ways to fix your mana pool. Essentially,
to guarantee that you can cast something.
Yeah, to make it easier to be able to cast something that you otherwise might not be able to cast. So he's talking about these dual lands, right? The problem is that they're at a high rarity. Well, dual lands effectively produce two different types of mana, either separately or together.
Yeah, this time it's one or the other.
Okay, one or the other. So say you've got, you pull one of these rare lands that says, I will produce blue and white, but your red pool is really strong. Well, this would be a great opportunity to, if you have one of those other multicolored cards, you could use that land plus maybe another 2 or 3 planes, depending on kind of where your mana distribution is. Like that's a way to use what you pulled to your advantage. Because like oftentimes you pull somebody like one great card in a color and not enough to really support it. So how do you deal with that? Well, you can splash. Oftentimes you might not even want to use it at all. Like I pulled a Planeswalker and not used it because it's like, and Planeswalkers are generally considered the most powerful cards in Magic just because, like he said, there's sorceries on the board that you can use multiple times, only once per turn, but they're just overall powerful. So just, looking at kind of your rarity distribution, your color distribution, and taking all those things into effect helps you go from 90 down to effectively 23 or 24, right? Depending on how many mana sources or lands that you play. Yeah,
and within that, there are different types of mana costs within the colors. Yeah. So the way that mana costs are represented is there's sometimes a number, which can be paid by any color of mana, and then there's the color symbol. So for like red, it's like a red circle with a fireball, basically, right? So if a card has 2 of those red pips, then it's less able to be put into a deck that isn't primarily red.
Yeah.
Because you need 2 red lands, 2 mountains, to produce that color restriction. And those cards tend to be more powerful and more above rate because they're restricted. That's something that you'll see a lot is this card is expensive or this card is cheap for what it does, but it has 3 green pips, so you have to be in green. Yeah, and that's something super relevant right now. If you're listening to this before January 17th, 2020, Devotion is what we call that, or Devotion is kind of a keyword ability that adds effects. Like if your Devotion to green is X or greater, then certain things might happen. It would be like an enchantment that you play or a creature that you play that would have an added effect. And so when you're looking at Devotion to a certain color, you look at those color pips in the top right. So that's something that's relevant to
where we are,
relevant, yeah.
to Theros. So yeah, I agree. That's something to take into consideration is the actual mana cost. Like there's converted mana cost, which is like how many mana do you need? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But then the actual mana cost, or like the colored mana, is going to be kind of a determining factor of whether you can play it or not.
Yeah, 100%. You have to again, we keep talking about all of these different little pieces. It's a lot easier to see when you have it in front of you that you are capable of putting this all together.
Yeah.
And as long as you know the rules of the base game, right, of like how to actually play and go through a turn, you will eventually get a distinctive understanding of when is this card going to be good, and when is this card going to be bad. So therefore, there's something that a couple of other podcasts, Magic podcasts, talk about, which is quadrant theory. In particular, this is from Limited Resources, which is a great podcast for drafting, sealed, actually playing just in general, because one of the co-hosts is LSV, Louis Scott Vargas, one of the best Magic players of all time. And the other host is Marshall Sutcliffe, one of the best commentators of all time.
Yeah. Magic commentators.
One of the period. I mean, the guy does a great job.
All right, saying he's better than Harry Carey is like I'm not so sure about this.
One of. So the idea is, I think it's will this card get me ahead? When is this? Hold on. It feels weird being like pulling it up, but the basic idea of quadrant theory is like you decide in what game state a card is good in. So is it good when I'm behind? Is it good when I'm ahead? Is it good at parity, or is it good on its own? Basically, you and your opponent are kind of in the same spot.
Okay.
So
almost like a stall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's a stall. Is it good early? Is it good late? Is it good when I'm behind or when I'm ahead? Does it get me from being behind? Did it get me to being ahead? If it does, then it's a great card, right? If it doesn't, then it's okay, and you're probably still going to play it. Like you're not going to play just great cards. If you did, your deck would be 3 cards and 37 lands. Like every card you put in your deck kind of needs to have a function, but it may not be the optimal card.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I like about Limited, and that some people find frustrating about Limited, is that you have to kind of make something that is more than the sum of its parts whenever you're given the cards for a Limited deck. And there's no one right way to build a deck out of a Limited pool. And when we say pool, it's all of the cards that you're given is
the 90
considered
cards.
a pool. Yeah. So there's not one way to do it. You might build it differently than, and like I might build it differently than what Andy would build.
Yeah.
And Andy might build it differently than what the next person would build, right?
And that's something that we sort of talked about a couple weeks ago with C&C Power Hour we did. At the last pre-release, we had another 6 packs that we opened and used, and we actually talked about building on stream. I forget exactly the date on that, probably early October.
Yeah.
After the pre-release.
Yeah, there's a video of all of us sitting down together and walking through deck construction.
Yeah.
Which we'll link in the description in the podcast show notes that you guys can check out. It's us basically going through the Throne of Eldraine, which was the most recent set, like building a pre-release pool, or building a pre-release deck from a Throne of Eldraine pool.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of fun. It was a very interesting experience, and we all talked about what we like and what we don't like, and how we evaluate cards. And again, you know, there are so many schools of thought in Magic that what we're saying isn't necessarily the right one. So like there are all sorts of other places you can go to. Before we get to talking about the other places you can go to, is there anything else that we really want to talk about? Oh, a curve. You want to explain a mana curve?
Yeah, I can talk about mana curve. So we talk about the numbers, right? The mana cost, right? Generally speaking, you want to have a mana curve that works with the card power, the card mana cost that you put together, right? So let's say you've got a bunch of cards that cost 3, and they're really great, and you put them all in your deck. You have no cards that cost 1, you have no cards that cost 5, or nothing higher than 4, let's say. Suddenly you run into this problem of, well, I'm playing all my 3-cost manas, or 3-cost cards, and I'm not really getting to where I need to be to win. Because generally speaking, better cards, better costs, that kind of fits into with the rarity thing too. So you kind of want to look at what we call the mana curve, which generally speaking is the shape of a bell curve, where you have a few low-cost spells, so that's 1, 2, and 3. A couple of those mid-costing cards would be 3, 4, 5, and even sometimes a couple of those high-cost cards, 4, 5, 6, or greater.
And the reason it's like a bell curve is because you only have a couple 1 and 2s because you only need those early game.
Right.
You only have a couple 6, 7, 8 plus whatever because you only need a couple of those at the late game.
Yeah.
But you have a lot of 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah. And that can change too, depending on your strategy. Like if you're playing aggro, or what I call the white weenies deck, or the red aggro deck, goblin deck, generally speaking, you're going to have a lot of those 1, 2, 3 cost cards, and nothing that's higher than 3. And that can be really to your benefit, especially if you have ways to draw cards. So like if you're playing traditionally like a red and blue deck, because blue is really great at drawing cards. Oftentimes you'll keep drawing cards, because the problem with if you don't have a good mana distribution is suddenly you play 3 cards in a turn and suddenly you have nothing in hand. So there's strategy, and again that poker face type thing that we talked about at the beginning of I have nothing in my hand, which means my opponent can do whatever they want, because it's not like I'm gonna respond to anything that they're doing. So thinking about that with the mana curve, like you want to be able to sort of have something to play at all times. And if you play all of your cards in one turn, that may be good in an aggro deck where you're just trying to beat face and get in as quickly as possible. But if you have any sort of long strategy, then you're gonna really take the curve into consideration.
For sure. And you also, within the curve, and while you're playing, you want to think about mana efficiency. So let's say it's turn 4, and you have 1 3-drop or 2 2-drops in your hand, and you have 4 mana on the field. Unless something else is happening, it's probably better to play the 2 2-drops.
Yeah.
Just to go wider from your opponent, to have more. By wider, we mean more things on the board than they do. And really, especially in the early game, it is really important to go at least play something on turn 2, play something on turn 3, play something on turn 4. Like those first 3 or 4 turns of the game can kind of really decide or set the tone for the game of who is being the aggressor. Because even if you're playing control, which is not necessarily aggressive, you're still the aggressor if you're the one controlling the game, right? If you're on the back foot, you're not the aggressor. And there's plenty of Magic theory on this as well. One of the best theory articles ever that anybody ever talks about is who's the beatdown, and that will really help put into perspective, like, oh, I need to press my advantage here. I am the one doing the most damage. I have the best creatures on board. I need to keep doing more of this. Or how do I stop my opponent from doing this? So you kind of want to value the couple early, early stuff. You have to pay attention to that, because if you're not able to do that and your opponent overwhelms you early on, it's really tough to get caught back up. So one of my favorite things to do in Limited is to go, the ideal hand is, the ideal sequence of events is 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, 2 2-drops. Those first 4 turns, if you can pull it off and your opponent hasn't, it's basically smooth sailing.
And one of the things too to think about is, you were talking about you should have X number of lands, so 14 to 18 lands, and then the other part of that is spells. So that's 23, 17 is kind of what I stick to. There are games where I play 15 and 25, and that's really fun, but it's also really dangerous, because if I don't have enough mana, then I'm not going to be able to cast either my high drops or my low drops.
Right.
But looking at that a little bit more in depth with the 25 or 23 spells, there's kind of a distribution too of, how many of those are creatures, how many of those are spells. And again, it goes back to what strategy you're playing. If you're playing that control deck, you might have more spells than creatures, or a more equal amount. Whereas aggro, you're pretty much playing all creatures that are low cost and can get in attack as quickly as possible. And same thing with like the long game too. You want to have more high-end creatures. You might want to consider playing more creatures, or a more balance of creatures and spells, where you have spells that get you mana or help you go find mana. Like I'm thinking specifically about the green color, which is all about like an attunement with nature, right? And you think about land, nature, you're going to go find lands, or you're going to be able to search your deck and add lands to the battlefield because you're limited to playing one per turn. But if you can go and pull lands from your library and put them on the battlefield, you suddenly have more lands than your opponent. And that's what we call ramp, which is a way to, you were talking about that earlier, a way to have more mana faster than traditionally, what you're traditionally able to do.
Yeah. And there's a smaller component with that, is that the more lands you're able to get out of your deck, the more cards that you draw will be spells that you can cast.
Yeah. Call that gas.
Gas, yeah.
The more gas you have.
Yeah. And that can definitely be really important. A lot of the times, like so if we want to talk like a baseline, bare bones skeleton outline of a deck, you're going to look at 15 to 18 lands.
Sure.
I almost never go as low as 14, but
let's call it 17 for ease of math.
Yeah. So 17 lands, 23 spells. But within those spells, you're probably looking 12 creatures, 12 to 15 creatures, eight non-creature spells, right? Like, because in limited, in particular, like what we were talking about earlier with threat production, like even if the creature isn't super powerful, it's still there. It's still something your opponent has to deal with, or that you can use to deal with your opponent.
Exactly.
So in these sorts of things, you almost always want to have a solid base of creatures, and then look at removal spells or spells that put you towards the game plan of playing your creatures or finding your creatures, or enhancing your creatures, because that's where most of Magic happens, is the interactions on the battlefield. Which is that changes differently when you get into Constructed, which is where people, like we said with Friday Night Magic and other tournaments, where people pre-create their decks and bring them based on particular deck construction restrictions. And Limited is that you have to do the best that you can with what you have, and a lot of the time you can mitigate your risk by playing more and more creatures. Yeah. So I know that we've talked a lot about like why you should go to pre-release and what to do when you get there. We didn't really talk about how to play the game.
Sure.
And that's because it's kind of tough to do without visualizing it.
Yeah.
So there is a long time ago, actually, when Caleb and I recorded the episode 34 for the Magic thing, we also recorded a how to play video that's still up on the CNC Power Hour YouTube channel. There are a couple of other places that you can go. Jimmy Wong, who is the brother of Freddie Wong from Rocket Jump, if you're familiar with that production channel on YouTube.
Freddie W.
Yeah.
From way back.
From way back. He produced a couple of learn how to play videos for Wizards of the Coast. There's a YouTuber whose videos that I really like called Explanation Point, who did a very concise and very fast version of how to play.
17 minutes, I think, or less.
I think that's right. And he goes over everything. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
And his style is like, I don't know if you ever watched Zero Punctuation.
I think so.
Yeah, it's kind of like that, where it's very fast paced and kind of outlandish sometimes, but it's real fun. I found the channel because he does video essays on anime, and that's a whole other topic. But that's a whole other topic. Yeah. There's also Spell Slingers, which really got us into Magic. Helped get us into Magic.
Yeah.
Because Friday Nights from Letting Ready Run is a Magic comedy series that doesn't really teach you how to play. But Spell Slingers, it's from Geek and Sundry, which is Felicia Day's YouTube entertainment network, basically, I guess is the best way to put it. And they talk about their decisions on what they're playing, what the spells do, what they allow them to do, what they're hoping that they do. And like you can kind of go through and see a game progress. And it's hosted by Sean Plott, or Day9, who has been really big in the StarCraft and esports scene since before I started paying attention to it. So almost over a decade, or at least over a decade. That's a good one. There's also Magic Arena, which we play. It's free to play. If you're on PC, they haven't released a Mac client yet.
Not yet. Coming 2020. Maybe even as soon as March, I think.
Okay,
that's what I heard. Good. So, Arena's great as far as teaching you the game because there's what's the character, Sparky that walks you through how to cast spells, how to tap your mana, how to do everything from a basic standpoint of like this is how you Magic. So it's great, and again, it's free to play. So I definitely recommend going through that if you're learning how to play Magic. And you don't have to if you're introverted like me, you don't have to talk to people. So you can just talk to Sparky, which is a computer. So. Or
you can play against other opponents online when you get comfortable with it. The game Magic Arena handles all the rules and interactions for you. You just have to make the choices.
Right.
But that is basically how it should work in real life anyway, right? Is that if you need to, a judge will come handle all the rules and interactions for you. So definitely check out Magic Arena. It's like we said, it's free to play. You can do limited events on it. You can also the Theros Beyond Death, which is the upcoming set. I guess this is the first time we've actually mentioned the whole name of the upcoming set. Theros 2: The Return. It will actually be on Magic Arena before the 17th.
Okay.
So they usually drop it that Wednesday, which I think is the 15th.
So if today's the 10th, then 15th or maybe even Tuesday. I thought
maybe it might be that Tuesday.
Yeah.
So just download Arena, and you'll be able to play with these cards a little bit early. And get yourself more familiar with it. However, those events do cost at least in-game currency, which you might have to spend money to acquire. So we don't necessarily recommend it, but if you play Arena, and you go to a pre-release, your pre-release pack will have a code for stuff within Arena, whether it's a booster pack, a couple of booster packs, or a free game for like a free game of Sealed.
I was gonna say I think it's usually draft is what they do. You get a free draft or something like that. So, which is a great way to learn Magic too, because you're looking at cards and you're studying them. And the best part about Arena is when you do a draft, then you're drafting cards, you're picking cards one at a time from different packs. There's no timer. There's no you have to make a choice right now, which is a real high advantage versus playing in a local game store for a draft.
Right.
Where you're on a timer or people are waiting on you. So you can take your time and learn the cards with a draft pretty easily.
And when we say draft, you're given a booster pack and you can take one card from it and then you pass it. And it will come back to you because there are only 8 other players in the draft.
7 other players.
7 other players, 8 total. I put players in air quotes because on Arena, they're robots. But on Magic the Gathering Online, which is another way to play, but I don't think it has a tutorial, and also the interface is archaic, is the nicest way to put it. It's
looks a little like Chandelier, right?
Basically, that was the template,
which is an old PC game that we're playing on CNC Power right now. Not right now, but
now. We did.
It was fun. It was fun.
It was a 1997 game, and the Magic the Gathering online interface has not advanced from that. But Magic Arena It looks more like Hearthstone
Sure.
than anything else. So it's flashier and it's more interesting. And, if you want to get your feet wet and there's not someone that you know, and you don't want to immediately go to tonight's Friday Night Magic since the 10th is a Friday, right? Like, you don't want to just like suddenly go. Check out Arena, and then once you have a handle on the on all the rules and stuff, come check us out, because Lou and I will be doing an in-depth set review for Theros Beyond Death. We've been doing this for the past couple of sets. Not only has it been fun for us, but we've had a couple of people like ask us when we're going to do the next one.
Yeah.
Which is like, yeah. Well, I mean, yeah.
So like, I don't have time to go through all the cards, but you do. Thank you.
Yeah.
I can just watch you talk about them.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and that will also be accompanied with an article that goes up to etherhub.com, and the video is a lot of fun because we take a look. We look at it basically almost from the perspective of, hey, I'm at a pre-release. What do I need to look at, right? You need to. We started off by talking about a couple of special interactions. We focus on removal. We talk about like what these spells will kill, like how many people or how many creatures it deals with, and so whether or not it's really worth putting in. And then we talk about the deck archetypes of like, oh, this is what red and blue are supposed to do. These are the key cards you want to look for, and if you have multiples of these cards, then you're set. So that's a lot of fun for Lou and I, and it's a very unique take on doing Magic set reviews, because most people just evaluate them card by card. Yeah. Which is not that helpful if you don't.
You don't give it context.
Yeah, if you don't give it context, and that's one of the big things about me and how I evaluate things in general, is that you have to look at the bigger picture. Yeah. You can't just look at the granular stuff. The granular stuff can help you look at the bigger picture, but you have to look at them both. Yeah. And that's what I like about the set reviews that we do. Not that we have taken this Cuz We're Nerds episode and turned it into a giant plug for the C&C Power Hour.
What? We haven't?
No. Where it's just that this is something that we're extremely passionate about, and we want other people to experience and hopefully be passionate about too. Yeah. Because honestly, I don't know where we'd be without Magic. We certainly wouldn't be doing the CNC Power.
Yeah, it would look a lot different if we did.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, Magic is so much fun, and it's so... No two games are alike. Like, you can play the same two decks against each other, and every game is a new experience. And that's the good thing about like the pre-release is your deck doesn't work the first game. Well, you've got at least one more game to play. Plus, if you go to a store with rounds and stuff like that, you've got three more times, and this is something to talk about later or earlier, 3 more times to kind of refine your deck and make it look a little bit better, or make it work a little bit differently depending on noticing what happened in that first game, what needs to be different. Right. So I mean, that's like the great thing about a pre-release is it's a test for the set. It's a test for your knowledge on like how to play Magic and how to adapt and adjust, and you really get to learn the intricacies of how cards work together, their interactions through a pre-release. So, yeah, it's just exciting to be a part of, and Magic is just fun.
Yeah, as a huge community, it's worldwide.
Yeah,
like that's one of the things that has always kind of blown my mind about it. Like if I were to go to Germany or something, I could probably find a game store. Yeah. And still play, because the cards are recognizable by art, and so people can kind of know what that is. Or you can ask a judge to pull up the card in the correct language for you, and you can just kind of go anywhere, especially in the continental United States. Like I played games in Los Angeles. I live in Atlanta. Right? Like I just randomly on a whim found a game store when I was out in Los Angeles, and that was an expensive medical bill, but that's a story for another day. But
your face looks all right now.
Yeah, thanks, buddy. It didn't look all right before. It certainly didn't look all right after the game store incident.
It looks better.
Yeah, yeah. I put a lot of work into it. But yeah, so you can find this sort of community wherever you're at. And if you can't, there's online communities for it too. You don't have to go to a local game store to experience the discussion and the camaraderie. But I find that it's the most relaxed way to do it. And on top of that, like there are events hosted in multiple cities every weekend.
Oh yeah.
Just dedicated to Magic and Magic tournament play. So like Star City Games hosts a tournament series, mostly in the like Midwest and East Coast, and Channel Fireball has the contracts to do all the Magic Fests, which are huge weekend-long conventions that have a main tournament and also have what are called side events where you can go and play whatever formats they have available every weekend all over the world.
Yep.
Yeah, so those are worth checking out once you later get into the game, and it's just a testament of like how big the game is.
Sure, definitely.
That it can support that sort of just costs. Convention centers aren't cheap.
No.
And being able to do it internationally and have people turn out for these events and stuff is a big deal.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like a whole world that you don't know exists until you set foot and start into the realm of Magic.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, very cool.
Anything else we want to add about the pre-release?
No, not about the pre-release.
Okay.
I think we've kind of covered it, and we've probably covered more than we needed to.
Absolutely.
In some places, and less than you guys wanted to in some other places. But that's what the feedback email is for.
Yeah. We don't get that, do we? Sorry, Caleb.
Yeah, Caleb's the only one monitoring the email account, so if you have any complaints, send them to him. And
hope you're having a great time and Point Doom.
Yeah, yeah, he'll be fine.
Woof.
So let's. So there are a couple of things that we can talk about now that we're done talking about Magic.
Yeah.
I'm gonna take like just a piece of something that you're obsessed with or have been the past like week.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay.
So like I've got mine, but like, is there something that you have like watched or listened to or something like that that you want to share, or some news?
Like some news?
Yeah, not like personal, but like
No.
in the world that you want to talk about. Like,
No.
there's okay, all right. Well, I'm a big fan of video essays and stuff like that.
Yeah. I want to hear about this, so
yeah.
that's why I'm saying no.
Okay, all right. So there's a video that Patrick at Polygon put out called "Let's Talk About Dark Souls One Last Time." Wait, where are you going? And it's a great look at the Dark Souls type games from FromSoft and their influence on not only games but games discourse in the 2010s. And it's like a lot of Polygon stuff. It's very comedic and very well edited, and it's a very fascinating look into a series that I kind of dismissed for a long time, just because like a lot of the culture around it is, oh hey, we're super hardcore gamers because we play this really really hard game,
Yeah.
or this really hard game series that is meant to be hard and meant to be punishing. When really that's just people posturing, and it's actually a lot of fun whenever you get to actually play it. And, the people that talk about it like that are kind of insufferable, but the video talks about why they were like that, where the influences of Dark Souls came from, and what games that has influenced, and things like that. It's maybe 15 minutes, a little over 15 minutes, and it's totally worth checking out. I like a lot of the stuff over at Polygon.
Yeah.
They do a lot of really interesting, not necessarily always factual videos, but a lot of the ones they do are. And then there's Brian David Gilbert's Unraveled, which is where he sort of like takes a topic and goes way too deep into it. And I think one of the most recent ones was him using his creating a sim version of himself to model his ideal life.
Oh no.
It's a wild ride, and it's actually very cool because there is a point where he starts recreating stuff in real life.
Oh no.
And it's really touching and really strange. I'm a big fan of it.
That's great.
Definitely worth checking out. I love all of Brian David Gilbert's stuff, but the Let's Talk About Dark Souls One Last Time, Wait, Where Are You? Video is, if you're not familiar with Dark Souls, it's a great place to look into it and see what people liked about it, what people didn't like about it, and whether or not it's worth your time.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that it had a lot of influence on the gaming culture or the games in general, development, design, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's fascinating. Fascinating. I love where technology and the gaming industry has gone in the 2010s. So that's an episode topic we should talk about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the rise of indie games and stuff like that. That would definitely be because like the late 2000s was like the tipping point for indie game development.
Yeah,
and
100%.
That, yeah, you're right. That is another topic. We should get that,
Yeah, where you go from like all these big budget games to there are people doing this. I mean, that's how like a lot of industries have gone lately, whether it's game development or photography, art, like I don't know, software, books,
video production.
Video production. The fact that consumers or former consumers can now do this stuff for a living, like, it's awesome. It's basically what we're here doing. Like, podcasts in the 2000s were professionally done. Like, you didn't really
it was basically NPR stuff just recorded and released online.
Man, it's all a reflection of the game industry. Let's call it that.
Yeah. We're adding that to the topic list.
Yeah.
I'm excited about that one. So how does this go? That was that, and this is this. What you been up to?
Dude, I've been playing Breath of the Wild, and it's been a wild ride. I should say I've been playing, like, I think I'm maybe an hour into it. I'm still on
You're still on the Great Plateau?
Yeah, I'm still on the Great Plateau. I've done 2 out of X number of shrines. So I'm not very far, but I'm having a lot of fun. It's good to be back in Zelda, like in Hyrule. It's good to be back in that world.
Well, was the trigger for this the lo-fi Zelda hip hop
beats? 100%. Oh my gosh, please link that in the description because oh dude, it's fi.
Yeah. It's a real good little album. I like it.
Yeah. What about you? What have you been up to?
Well, I want to talk about Breath of the Wild a little bit.
I didn't know this segment went this long.
Yeah. Well, this is me we're talking about here. So I've played Breath of the Wild a little bit on stream, and it's fun, but I hate
the combat?
The durability system.
Yeah, the durability system.
The combat itself is fantastic. Okay. Like the way that it works, the things that you can do, it's actually Souls-like. Watch the video and you'll understand why I did that because anyway. But it's it's very interactive and it's a lot of fun. But I don't want to have to worry about my weapons breaking.
Yeah, I don't like that.
It's probably my least favorite thing. Everything else in the game is lovely.
Yeah. Is there eventually an indestructible weapon?
Kind of. I haven't gotten to it in my playthrough, but I know about
a repairable weapon?
Kind of. So
that's a piece of disappointment to look forward to.
Yeah.
Or dread. I don't know.
Yeah. But outside of that, like Breath of the Wild was one of the most popular games of 2018 for a reason.
Yeah. Well,
for many reasons.
One of the things that I looked at before I bought it was why is it still $60? And like part of it is Nintendo's ecosystem of like these games are great. You're never going to get them anywhere else, so we don't have a reason to charge anything less.
Yeah, they almost never do discounts on first-party games.
Nope.
Yeah.
So I was like, all right, fine. If I'm going to spend $60, it's going to be on Breath of the Wild and nothing else from Nintendo because like it's a really great game from what I've heard and from what I've experienced.
Yeah.
So
it's definitely something. And even if you're not a big fan of Legend of Zelda, like it's such a good game on its own that is worth checking out if you have a Switch.
Yeah.
I guess that's the caveat. Don't buy a Switch for it, but if you have a Switch, definitely get it. When it came out, it was a Switch seller.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
For sure. Like if you didn't have a Switch, it was worth buying it for Legend of Zelda, and now it's worth buying it for a couple of other games too.
Yeah.
But Breath of the Wild it's a lot of fun. It's really open and expansive, and the game systems all work in very interesting ways together, which I like. But it's worth checking out. I'm glad that you finally picked it up.
Yeah, I like the crafting system. It's interesting too. Like I'm learning cooking and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's nice to like. It feels more like an RPG than like I'm just going around swinging my sword.
Yeah.
So
speaking of cooking, and back to the Brian David Gilbert Polygon video stuff, we should watch the one where he recreates all of the Zelda recipes in real life and taste test them.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I guess we'll go with that.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Yeah. Oh.
Now's my chance. What you been up to?
What
hey,
do
Chris.
I been up to? Well, I got a dog recently.
Oh gosh.
Pluto, whose head is way too big for his body, and it's adorable.
I have not met him yet.
Well,
Recently.
you haven't seen him in a while.
Yeah.
But he's here. He's just hanging out upstairs. I'm finally caught up on My Hero Academia and One Piece, and both of them are. Season 4 of My Hero Academia has been kind of like a slow burn.
Interesting.
A lot of it's been like talking and setup, but the past like 3 or 4 episodes have all been like progressive fights, but each one has been focused on a particular character in the situation, and it's all kind of like it's all going down.
Yeah.
And it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And One Piece is actually in the same spot where there's an antagonist that has been built up a lot, and we finally get the main character and the antagonist to meet each other, and the main character gets stopped, just wrecked.
Yeah.
It's been really interesting, and I can't wait for the next episode. And The Good Place.
Yeah.
I just finished season 3. I'm going to start season 4. I love the show.
It's
I
so
love the show
good.
so much.
It's so like wholesome but still like there's a little bit of risqueness because, not to spoil anything, but they're in the good place, so it's like everything's just really funny. I don't know.
Yeah. So the premise of the show is that these people wake up
After they die.
in the afterlife, and they're greeted by Ted Danson, which if that's how I'm going to be greeted in the afterlife, I'm totally okay with that. And he explains that they're in the good place, which is basically heaven. Like they're every need of theirs is provided for. They're given a soulmate and like their dream house and things like that. And the main character isn't supposed to be there.
Right.
And so it's her basically trying to not screw things up.
Yeah.
And it's a very, very wild ride, but it's a lot of fun. The humor is really impressive.
Yeah.
Like it's really snappy and really clever. There's a non-zero amount of visual humor, and all the like characters like physical mannerisms are really impressive. There's one episode where that matters, because there's one episode where there's a bottle episode where one character plays one actress plays all of the characters.
Yeah.
And I love that episode.
Yeah.
Janet's probably the best character. But yes, it's a great show. Definitely worth checking out if you haven't seen it. It's only going to be 4 seasons. The last season's on air right now. Mm-hmm. There's also a podcast from people that worked on the show.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
You can check out. I cannot remember what it's called. We'll have to link it in the show notes. But it started in season 2. It might just be the Good Place podcast, but they bring in actors and stuff and writers, and they talk about it, and it's really interesting. And a lot of the people you'll find in there are kind of relatable, or will remind you of people because like Tahani's physical mannerisms are just Paige.
Yeah.
Who's a Disney princess friend of ours. It's a great show. I love it. It's Kristen Bell, Ted Danson. Those are the 2 biggest names, but. Yeah. It's a Michael Schur show, so if you like Parks and Rec or Brooklyn Nine-Nine, it's from the same creator, and it's a very human show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's I think that's what I like about it the most.
Yeah.
And then Gabe and I finally streamed Persona 4 Golden for the first time in like 6 months.
Oh my gosh,
it's been a long time.
How'd that go, by the way?
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We did a bit.
Like a bit, or like we did a bit, like.
It's a long game, folks.
So in the grand scheme of things, it was a bit.
Yeah,
like a tiny bit.
We'll talk about JRPGs and how long they are and all sorts of stuff. Look forward to that episode, but
I'm not.
Yeah, fair. But yeah, it's I love the Persona games. It's just that it's a grind. You have to take it a day at a time in the game because it has a calendar system and stuff like that. So. Like in the game time, we got through like a week in like 2 hours. But the stuff that we didn't accomplish a whole lot. So, you know who did accomplish a whole lot though?
Who?
That would be Taylor Poole, who did our music.
Dude.
You can check him out at taylorpoolemusic.com. TAYLORPOLE music.com. So he did our theme song, and which is a great theme song. I really like it. You could also
sorry, I'm just singing it.
You can also check us out, right? Where can they find us?
Check us out.
Yeah.
CNCPower.com or twitch.tv/CNC Power Hour.
Let's see the letter NC Power Hour.
CNCPowerHOUR.
Yeah. That's where we stream Magic and video games throughout the week. And
possibly some new stuff. We'll
possibly
see.
some new stuff.
2020 is going to be exciting.
Yeah, we got some stuff in the works. We're really excited about.
Yeah.
And then for Cause We're Nerds, you can check us out on our website, CUZWERENERDS.com.
Perfect, I think.
Yeah, probably. Type that in and see if that gets there.
Thanks for listening to Cause We're Nerds. Stay up to date with all the nerdy news and podcast drops by following us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also leave us comments and feedback at causewe'renerds@gmail.com. That's CUZWERENERDS@gmail.com. COM. And as always, if you enjoyed this podcast, we would love it if you would leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. We'll see you in 2 weeks. And as always, stay nerdy.